Companion planting. Is it science or folklore? At the present time, the term companion planting is not fully recognized by scientists. There is, however, scientific data that shows the benefits of certain practices that are major players in companion planting strategies. For instance, interplanting, plant association, biodiversity, and polyculture. Through my research, trial and error, and some bountiful harvests over the years, I have found many of these practices to be beneficial in my gardens. Gardening to me isn't just about growing things, it's about being creative and open to what nature has to offer and working alongside her. So what are the benefits of a companion planting strategy? We will get into some of the ways you can increase your yields, reduce your pests, and do so without having to use chemical pesticides and fertilizers. We'll talk about plants that can invite beneficial insects and birds into your garden, and those that might deter undesirable pests. We'll discuss certain aspects of plants that lend themselves to assisting other plants. And we'll explore subjects like biodiversity and polyculture. So let's get going and break this down. In this section, we explore how to invite pollinators, beneficial insects, and birds into our garden spaces. Birds help to keep insect populations down. Pollinators help us with, pollination. And beneficial insects are able to zero in on many species of undesirable pests. It is imperative that you know the good bugs from the bad. In Section 2, we'll discuss how plants can be synergistic. Some plants can provide structural assistance, shade, and added nutrients. Plants that require a structure can be grown next to others that can provide physical support. Corn has been used in the Three Sisters method for hundreds of years. It provides a very strong stock for beans and peas to grow up on. Sunflowers and amaranth also make great supports. Squash plants, also used in Three Sisters, has very large leaves and can provide shade for heat-sensitive plants. These large leaves also serve as a living mulch. They can help to keep the soil and roots of other plants cooler. They can also help with soil evaporation. Lettuce and basil do well under the shade of these large leaves. I plant squash near strawberries to give them just a little bit of shade. And I plant eggplant near sunflowers to take advantage of the filtered sun that they provide in the heat of the day. This technique is often referred to as nurse cropping. Now we'll explore soil health, nutrients, biodiversity, and synergistic plant relationships. Peas, beans, and legumes are able to sequester carbon in soil, make their own nitrogen from the atmosphere, and leave nitrogen-rich residue in soils after harvest. The symbiotic relationship is beneficial for the next crop planted in its place. I like to use sweet peas for several reasons. The seed pods are not edible, and the plants can be cut down before seeds are formed. This is recommended for optimum nitrogen fixation. The flowers can be used for fragrant bouquets. Companion planting creates biodiversity or polycultures. Having a variety of the right plants planted together can yield more varied and nutrient-rich harvests and provide a greater immunity against certain bacteria. Plant symbiosis is defined as plants living together closely in harmony of one kind or another. This concept has been around for hundreds of years and is the key component of the Three Sisters method. In this strategy, corn, peas or beans, and squash are planted together. The corn supports the beans and peas, which fix nitrogen, and the leaves of the squash keep the soil and the roots of all the plants cooler and also help with water evaporation. Another good trio planted together is asparagus, tomatoes, and basil. Asparagus can repel nematodes that attack tomatoes, while tomatoes repel asparagus beetles. Basil can add to the vitality of the tomatoes and repel hornworms. It is also known to repel aphids, mosquitoes, and asparagus beetles. Section 3. Plants as baits and barriers. In this section, we will look at using plants to confuse undesirable pests, to repel pests, or lure pests away from crops, and/or invite beneficials in. Confuse the enemy. You can confuse pests by creating a mosaic of color, textures, and smells. Some of these aromatic compounds can mask the scent of crops, and some companion plant flower colors can confuse would-be crop attackers. Mint and society garlic are also used to mask and confuse. The strong odor of marigolds confuse pests while the roots repel nematodes. Strongly scented sage may confuse pests of brassicas, while the blue flower attracts hoverflies, a beneficial pollinator. Many of these plants have multiple beneficial properties. Repel pests. Many plants have the ability to repel pests by strong odors and mechanical means. One of my personal favorite natural pest repellents are green onions. Some time ago, I inadvertently discovered that squirrels that were raiding my crops will not go near this plant. I grow it all over the garden, and I slice up the large stems to scatter around on the top of the mulch in my beds. Physical barriers are another way a plant can repel a pest. Squash plants are very spiny and do a good job keeping squirrels and rabbits away from things grown in and around them. I use a lot of rosemary in my garden. It's a great pollinator lure, and it also can repel cabbage moths, bean beetles, and careflies. Lavender is abundant in my garden. It attracts a variety of pollinators that include hoverflies, bees, and butterflies. It also can repel aphids. Companion plants can be used outside of the garden as well. For instance, I cut lavender, mint, rosemary, and sage for my goat barn and my chicken coop. Pests are repelled by the strong aromas of these plants. I scatter them around the coop, in the roosting area, and in the nest boxes. This not only helps keep pests away naturally, it keeps the coop and our birds smelling great. Lavender is said to have a calming effect, which is good for our girls while they're laying their eggs. Our critters are a part of our family, and we spend a lot of time with them daily. We keep them healthy, happy, and pest-free, and they give us love, joy, and lots of eggs. We can use plants as lures to bring in beneficials or to keep harmful pests away from our crops. There are plants like nasturtiums that can serve as a sacrificial crop or a trap crop to lure aphids away from other plants. Marigolds have been considered a trap crop for slugs, thrips, and nematodes. And radishes as trap crops are said to attract flea beetles and root fly away from cabbages. Carefully planned plantings around the perimeter of your garden and beds can help bring in the good and keep out the bad. Companion planting works, but it takes a considerable amount of effort and research when incorporating it into your garden space. Before you plant, there are some things to consider, like your zone and microclimate. You will want to familiarize yourself with what crops belong together and which ones will not be compatible. By knowing your zone and microclimate, you can choose appropriate species of plants to grow in your area. It's also important to know the growing cycles of your plants, when they will germinate, bloom, and fruit. I like to establish a healthy population of pollinators in my garden all year long. Poppies and sweet peas are flowering in the late winter. By the time my veggies start to put out flowers, the pollinators are already established in the space. Iris, lavender, rosemary, gladiolas, calendula, and marigolds will be flowering all spring and into the summer. Sunflowers are the longest blooming pollen source and a valuable garden companion plant. They start late spring and continue into the fall. They readily self-seed and produce crops year after year. During the growing season, I will often let a plant or two out of a crop flower and go to seed. This way there are flowers when pollen might be a little more scarce. I will also let 1 or 2 artichokes stay on the plant and flower just because I love the way they look. This planting strategy is known as succession planting, and it ensures to have reliable availability of pollen almost year-round. Do your homework. There are so many combinations of plants to take advantage of. There are also some plants that just don't do well together. Utilize the many books or online resources to know what works together and what doesn't before you plant. Companion planting is a multifaceted but not complicated garden strategy. It is not a static practice, and as our global climates change, so will our gardening practices. If you're a creative gardener interested in growing crops that produce high yields of nutrient-rich food without the use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers, give companion planting a try. There is no shortage of information on this topic, and remember, your garden is unique. Through trial and error, eventually you just might create the perfect garden. Happy gardening!